Well, well, well. Look who got brave behind the glass. Look who mistook a screen for a throne and a private chat for a command center. Hello, you beautifully inconvenient problem in their neat little universe. Yeah, you. The one they checked on once, then twice, then every day like it was a medication they hate taking but can't stop. The one who turned curiosity into compulsion. The one whose name sits in their search bar at 3 a.m. like a guilty prayer. They call it research. They call it keeping tabs. They call it just making sure. But their thumbs don't move like concern. Their attention doesn't taste like protection. It tastes like hunger. It tastes like obsession, dressed up in polite language so they can sleep at night. And here's the part that made the ones observing you panic. Something big observed them first, not after. Not because you exposed them before, while they were still congratulating themselves for being strategic, while they were screenshotting your posts and analyzing your silence like it was a secret code, while they were sending their concerned scouts, fake friends with soft voices, sharp questions, and sympathy that felt rehearsed. They thought they were the hunters. They didn't realize they were the loudest prey in the room. They didn't realize their little operation had a scent. And some systems don't even need eyes to track you. Just pattern, just behavior, just repeated mistakes. You've felt the pressure, haven't you? That strange tightening around your life whenever you were about to rise. A message that arrives at the perfect time to distract you. A sudden misunderstanding that smells manufactured. A friendly face that asks for details they don't need. A compliment that lands like a probe. That wasn't imagination. That was people trying to map you, trying to reduce you into something predictable, containable, easy to label. They wanted you explainable so they could dismiss you. Because if you're explainable, you're not scary. If you're just like everyone else, then their envy doesn't have to hurt. Then their mediocrity can keep breathing. And here's the cruel joke. You don't scare them with what you do. You scare them with what you refuse to do. You don't perform panic for their entertainment. You don't beg for approval. You don't collapse when they poke you. You don't give them the meltdown clip they can pass around like a trophy. You keep building. You keep moving. You keep your spine. That kind of steadiness makes insecure people start acting like unpaid investigators. They form teams. They compare notes. They trade screenshots like currency. They turn your existence into a group project because they're too small to face you alone. But amateurs always reveal themselves the same way. They get repetitive. Obsession makes you predictable. Predictable makes you measurable. And measurable means you can be managed. That's why the bigger observer noticed them. Not because your watchers are important. They're not. Because they're noisy. Because they coordinate in ways that scream liability. Because they touch boundaries like they're optional. Because when a group of people starts treating someone's life like a surveillance project, they start leaving fingerprints everywhere without realizing it. Not literal fingerprints, behavioral ones, digital ones, social ones, professional ones. The kind that show up later in the form of, "Hey, has anyone else noticed this person is weirdly fixated?" And no, this isn't a cosmic fairy tale where karma kicks down the door with a cape on. This is the boring, silent machinery of consequence. The kind that lives in HR conversations, security audits, legal cautions, brand protection, leadership instincts, and those quiet phone calls that never become public but change trajectories. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't expose. It adjusts conditions. It redirects outcomes. It filters access. It decides who is safe to elevate and who is too unstable to keep near anything important. So while they were refreshing your page, something else was tracking theirs. While they were analyzing your silence, something else was analyzing their fixation. While they were building a narrative about you, something else was building a profile about them, made of forwarded screenshots. Just so you know, messages, uneasy conversations, pattern notes, and that career-ending phrase delivered with a polite smile. Keep an eye on this person, because real observation isn't about secret information. It's about intent. It's about what you repeatedly choose when you think no one serious is paying attention. They thought hiding behind fake accounts made them invisible. They thought private chats were a shadow. But shadows only exist because there's a light somewhere, and someone just turned on the floodlights. Now they're noticing tiny shifts in their own world, invitations that don't come, replies that take longer, opportunities that drift elsewhere, people who keep conversations shallow around them. Doors that used to open easily now require more review. A manager who suddenly gets cautious. A friend who stops laughing at their little updates about you and starts looking uncomfortable instead. Not because anyone is attacking them, because systems don't attack. Systems filter, and the irony is thick. They can't complain without confessing. Imagine them trying to explain, "I think I'm being watched." The immediate question becomes, why would anyone watch you? And then comes the question they can't survive. What were you doing that made you afraid of documentation? Innocent people don't fear receipts. Clean hands don't panic when the lights come on. They only panic when they know their behavior looks ugly from any angle that matters. They only panic when they realize their concern sounds like obsession. When you remove the cute wording and look at the pattern. Now let's talk about your orbit, because this is where their little operation starts collapsing. Some of the people they sent toward you came back different. Not because you hypnotized them, not because you converted them, because reality did something brutal to the script they were carrying. They expected a monster. They met a human. They expected chaos. They saw focus. They expected manipulation. They found someone who doesn't need to manipulate because your presence already shifts rooms. And when a spy meets truth, their loyalty gets complicated. Sometimes they come back quiet. Sometimes they come back uneasy. Sometimes they come back with that look in their eyes that says, "Wait, are we the bad guys?" That question is poison to a group built on ego, because it forces a mirror. And mirrors are deadly to people who built their personality out of watching someone else. Your watchers don't actually know who they are without you as a reference point. They measure themselves against you, resent you, track you, rehearse conversations about you. Because talking about you distracts them from the fact they're not becoming anything. You are their excuse and their entertainment. You are the distraction that keeps them from facing their own emptiness. And when you stop feeding that distraction, they start twitching. They start spiraling. They start needing a reaction the way an addict needs a hit. That's when they turn on each other. Because paranoia eats teams from the inside. If the mission is built on obsession, the first sign of exposure makes everyone scramble to save themselves. Suddenly they're asking, who talked? Who screenshotted this? Who leaked? They start policing each other, which is hilarious because it proves they always knew what they were doing was wrong. Innocent people don't fear documentation. Guilty people do. And the moment guilty people suspect they've been noticed by something bigger, they start rewriting history in real time. I never said that. I didn't mean it like that. You're taking it out of context. The classic songs of people who relied on darkness, then got shocked by light. And here's the darker, funnier layer. You didn't even have to fight back. That's what's driving them insane. You didn't go nuclear. You didn't make a spectacle. You didn't beg for sympathy. You didn't build your identity around being hunted. You did the worst possible thing to people who survive on attention. You became boring under scrutiny. Clean, consistent, restrained. You starved them of the only thing they truly wanted, your emotional energy. You refused to give them the satisfaction of watching you bleed in public. You kept your dignity so intact that their obsession started looking embarrassing, even to the people who used to clap for it. And the bigger observer, the something big, isn't impressed by their speeches, their captions, their sudden growth posts, their fake peace. It watches the pattern, who they target, how they coordinate, what boundaries they cross, how they respond when they don't get access, how they behave when they think a screen makes them untouchable. Once a system learns your pattern, you can't talk your way out of it. You can't motivational quote your way out of it. You can't pretend it was just jokes when the pattern shows intent. You can only stop or get managed. And being managed is humiliating because it looks like bad luck from the outside, while feeling like suffocation on the inside. So here's what's happening right now. Beneath all the noise they try to create, the weight is sliding back onto them, slowly, quietly, like gravity returning to the object that thought it could float forever. And the next time they open their group chat to run their little briefing on you, they're going to notice something colder than silence. Caution, short replies, missing enthusiasm. People suddenly remembering there are consequences for being the kind of person who spends their life watching someone else instead of building their own life. They're going to feel it in the way the room doesn't echo back the same. They're going to feel it in the way even their own allies start typing, then deleting, then going quiet. And that's when the panic turns real. Because if they've noticed the shift, they're going to do what obsessive people always do when they feel the leash tighten. They're going to make one last move to prove they still have access, one last probe, one last innocent reach, one last test to see if you'll react. And the second they do, they're going to learn the difference between being curious about you and being flagged as a problem. Because the bigger observer has been waiting for exactly that. One final data point, one final confirmation of intent, one final step that turns suspicion into certainty. And the moment that step happens, the next phase doesn't start with an explosion. It starts with a door quietly locking behind them. And you're going to feel the air change before you even know why. Because what happens next flows straight out of what they choose in that last desperate reach. And that last desperate reach is never as subtle as they think. It always wears the same cheap perfume. Hey, just checking on you. Heard something weird. Are you okay? I had a dream about you, so random. Someone mentioned your name, thought you should know. Translation, I'm still here. I can still touch the edges of your world. I can still pull a thread and see if you twitch. Because obsessive people don't want information. They want leverage. They want proof that your nervous system still responds to them, even if your mouth stays shut. Here's where the panic turns embarrassing. The moment they sense the leash tightening, they start performing innocence like it's a paid role. Suddenly they're posting about healing, Suddenly they're quoting boundaries. Suddenly they're preaching privacy like they invented it. Suddenly they're protecting my peace every 6 hours like it's a hostage statement. Real peace doesn't beg for witnesses. This is reputation CPR. This is a public rebrand written by private fear, because they can feel the atmosphere changing around them, and they don't know how to stop it, and they keep misdiagnosing the threat. Because ego makes people stupid in the most predictable way. They think you did something. They think you reported them. They think you called a powerful friend. They think you're plotting revenge. They cannot accept the simplest truth. You didn't need to lift a finger. Their own pattern got them noticed. Their own obsession did the paperwork. Their own group chat wrote the confession. The bigger observer didn't wake up because you screamed. It woke up because they couldn't stay quiet. That's the difference between amateur watching and real observation. Amateurs watch for gossip. Real observers watch for pattern. Amateurs want screenshots. Real observers want intent. Amateurs want drama. Real observers want risk reduction. And your watchers, these midnight investigators with shaky hands, have been gifting intent like it's a holiday. Every refresh, every burner account, every accidental run-in, every proxy they send to fish for details, every coordinated pylon they call just joking. They've been leaving fingerprints in places they didn't even realize had cameras. The bigger observer isn't impressed by their stories, because stories are excuses people tell themselves to stay comfortable. It doesn't care if they claim it was concern. It doesn't care if they swear it was curiosity. It looks at the output, how many times, how coordinated, how long, how invasive. Who do they recruit? What boundaries do they cross when they think no one serious is watching? Because that's the real test. People reveal who they are when there's no immediate consequence, and your watchers have been revealing themselves on repeat. Now let's get specific about what something big actually looks like. Because your watchers imagine spy movies, cloaks, secret handshakes. Reality is more humiliating than their fantasies. It's boring adults with responsibilities who don't tolerate instability near anything valuable. Security teams who don't want reputational risk. HR professionals who can smell fixation through a smile. Legal teams who hear coordinated harassment and immediately think liability. Platform safety teams who track brigading patterns, even when accounts rotate names and avatars like masks at a costume party. It's also social systems that don't need badges, friends who get tired of hearing your name every day. Colleagues who notice someone's eyes light up with a strange heat when you're mentioned. Partners who start asking, "Why do you care so much?" Family members who feel secondhand embarrassment at the obsession. People in their circle who quietly get disturbed and start saving messages just in case. Not out of loyalty to you, out of self-preservation. Because obsession is contagious, and nobody wants to be collateral damage when it finally blows back. Once those notes start moving, your watchers don't get exposed. They get deprioritized. They get slowed down. They get filtered. They get handled with caution. And in a world where access is everything, caution is a cage. That's why their panic leaks sideways. They don't approach you directly, because cowardice is part of the profile. They circle. They send proxies. They use mutuals like fishing lines. They try to gather information through third parties, then pretend it was accidental, like their curiosity just happened to trip and fall into your orbit again, because they're still trying to win the old game. If you snap, they get a story. If you explode, they get to point and say, See? We were right. If you fight, they get to play victim. If you collapse, they get to celebrate. But if you stay calm, if you stay boring under surveillance, you leave them nothing but their own ugliness. And that is the worst outcome for an obsessive person, being forced to stare at themselves with no distraction. They need your reaction so they don't have to reflect. They need you to burn so they can pretend they're firefighters. The bigger observer loves your calm because calm creates clean data. Calm removes noise. Calm turns you into the control group. They become the experiment. And obsessive people cannot tolerate being the experiment, because it means the spotlight is finally on their behavior, not your existence. So they escalate. They recruit more eyes. They embellish stories. They inflate lies. They build a mythology where you're a villain, a threat, a problem they must manage. Not because you did anything, but because your silence makes them feel seen. And insecure people treat being seen like an attack. Here's a detail that makes them sick. Sometimes the something big doesn't even have to decide manually. A lot of systems are designed to notice red flags repeating, unusual traffic patterns, coordinated reporting, sudden bursts of attention from clustered accounts, repeated contact attempts after being ignored, patterns of harassment across time. It's not romantic, it's mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about their excuses. So when they make that last probe, the one they think is small, it lands like a neat little confirmation in a ledger that doesn't forget. And once an alarm triggers, it doesn't mean a superhero arrives. It means a file starts, a note gets made, a ticket gets created, a manager gets looped in, a compliance officer asks a quiet question, a platform assigns a risk score, a team flags an account cluster, a workplace quietly decides, we don't need this person near sensitive projects. Your watchers hate this part because it's boring. They wanted drama. They wanted you to react. Instead, the consequence arrives like paperwork, and paperwork is forever. And this is the part they can't stand. The bigger observer doesn't need to hate them to end them. It only needs to classify them. Once you're classified as unstable, fixated, and comfortable with coordinated harassment, you become expensive to keep around. You become a risk that has to be managed, a fire that might spread, a headline waiting to happen. So your watchers get quietly moved away from anything that matters. Not punished in public, not dragged on a stage, just redirected slowly into smaller rooms everywhere with lower trust, fewer permissions, and less oxygen. The cage is administrative, and it's brutal. Watch the exact moment their group chat energy changes. It's subtle. Fewer jokes, more be careful. Someone typing, yo, chill with that. Someone else saying, delete that. A new tone. The tone of people suddenly remembering consequences exist. And then the first time someone says the quiet part out loud, the spell breaks. What if this comes back on us? Once that sentence enters the room, the fantasy dies. The whole operation was built on the belief they could do this forever, with zero cost. The moment cost becomes imaginable. Loyalty starts sweating. Fear turns teams into paperwork machines. Not dramatic betrayals, boring ones. Casual, just a heads-up messages. Forwarded screenshots to someone who actually has authority. A quiet conversation with a manager. A colleague mentioning it to HR as a concern. A partner asking a lawyer friend a hypothetical. A friend saving messages in a folder labeled something innocent, like MISC. Obsessive people think betrayal looks like a knife. In reality, betrayal looks like a timestamp, a screenshot, and a person saying, "I don't want this near me." And here's the comedy. While they're still watching you, they start watching each other. They track who viewed the story. They check who's still loyal. They police language. They coach each other on deniability. They start saying things like, "Don't type that," which is the loudest confession on earth. People doing nothing wrong don't hold meetings about how to look innocent. They don't rehearse excuses. They don't rewrite their memory. Only guilty groups do that. Only insecure groups do that. Only people who know they were trespassing suddenly care about optics. The bigger observer watches this stage carefully because the cover-up is a character test. When people realize they might be held accountable, do they stop? Do they reflect? Do they apologize? Or do they hide, gaslight, and double down? Your watchers choose hide every time. And that tells the bigger observer what it needs to know. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. This is who they are when the lights come on. And systems don't negotiate with patterns. They adjust around them quietly and permanently, like closing a valve. Now listen closely to the topic, because this is the blade. The ones observing you panicked because something big observed them first. First means before they got scared, before they started deleting, before they remembered privacy, before they started quoting mental health like a shield, before they ran the public rebrand. The bigger observer already had the receipts, already had the pattern, already saw them in their natural habitat, confident in cruelty, intoxicated by secrecy, convinced a screen makes them invisible. That's why deletions don't save them. Deleting a message doesn't delete the behavior that produced it. Deleting a chat doesn't delete the pattern that created it. And the bigger observer isn't hunting a single screenshot. It's building a profile. It's measuring the shape of a person. It's predicting future behavior from present habits. If someone coordinates harassment for entertainment, how do they behave with real authority? If someone stalks for ego, how do they handle sensitive information? If someone needs a target to feel alive, what happens when they're given a position where people depend on them? So what happens next isn't a dramatic gotcha. It's a quiet narrowing of their world. Opportunities that almost happen but don't. Collaborations that pause. Invitations that stop arriving. References that go lukewarm. Background checks that take longer. Projects that get reassigned. A manager who suddenly documents conversations. A policy reminder that feels oddly specific. Nothing they can point to and scream persecution. Just 1,000 tiny adjustments that add up to a completely different trajectory. And because they're addicted to control, they'll blame anything but themselves. They'll blame you because ego needs a villain. They'll blame haters. They'll blame the algorithm. They'll blame the economy. They'll blame energy. They'll even blame spiritual warfare, which is always funny coming from people who tried to weaponize attention like a curse. They will blame the weather before they blame their own obsession, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they were the unstable variable all along. Meanwhile, you're doing the most dangerous thing you can do to a parasite. You're not reacting. You're not feeding it. You're building your life like their obsession is background noise, because that's what it is. And that drives them into a special kind of madness, because it forces them to face the one thing they've been avoiding, their own emptiness. They used you as entertainment. They used you as a ladder. They used you as a mirror to feel taller. They turned your life into content because they didn't have a life that felt worth watching on its own. So they tried to drag you back in. One last probe, one last innocent reach, one last fake coincidence. They like an old post. They message a mutual. They ask a question that has nothing to do with anything. They don't want conversation. They want confirmation that they still exist in your world. And that's the moment the bigger observer says, "Perfect. Thank you for confirming intent." Because real observation doesn't need you to confess. It needs you to repeat the behavior when the risk rises. Repetition under pressure is the clearest signature there is. Here's where you feel the air change before you know why. The moment they make that last reach, you'll notice a strange calm in your body, like your nervous system finally realizes it's not alone in the room. You'll feel less hunted, less pressed, less watched. Not because they stopped looking, but because their looking stops mattering. Their gaze loses power the moment they become the liability. They were never dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they were unchecked. And now they're being checked in ways they can't argue with, can't screenshot, can't charm their way out of. You don't have to celebrate. You don't have to expose. You don't have to posture. You keep moving. You respond with absence, with the kind of non-reaction that feels like a courtroom. You don't announce them. You don't write a thread. You let the door close and you keep walking. And to an obsessive person, that feels like death, because it confirms the one thing they fear most. They never had control. They never had access. They were only ever trespassing, and trespassing always ends the same way, with the property owner not even needing to raise their voice. So watch how they start to unravel. Watch how their confidence turns into caution. Watch how their jokes turn into whispers. Watch how whispers turn into deletions. Watch how deletions turn into paranoia. And watch how paranoia turns them into the very thing they accused you of being: unstable, obsessed, unsafe. They will keep trying to prove they still have access, and every attempt will only make the profile clearer. Every attempt will feed the bigger observer one more data point, one more confirmation, one more reason to tighten the quiet net around their options. Because that's the brutal truth about being observed by something bigger. It doesn't rush, it doesn't rage, it doesn't miss. It waits for the pattern to complete itself, then it moves with quiet finality. And as your watchers scramble to pull you back into their little theater, they don't realize the board has already shifted under their feet, and the next small move they make, the one they swear is harmless, is about to trigger the kind of consequence that doesn't look like punishment at first, until they turn around and realize the door behind them has been locked for a long time. Doors don't slam when real power closes them. They seal. They slide shut without sound, like a vault deciding you no longer qualify as trusted. And the funniest part is, your watchers never notice the exact second it happens. They only notice later, when they reach for the same old strings, and the strings aren't attached anymore. They tug harder. Nothing. They try a different angle. Nothing. They send a proxy with a friendly face and a just checking on you script. And the proxy comes back with no story, no leverage, no useful reaction to report. Just emptiness. And emptiness is terrifying to people who survive by pulling threads. Obsessive people don't want information. They want leverage. They want proof that your nervous system still responds to them, even if your mouth stays shut. So they run the last play in the book. The innocent reach, the random message, the nostalgia bait, the fake concern, the compliment that smells like a trap. They want a reaction, any reaction, because reaction is oxygen to a parasite. If you react, they can crawl back to their group chat and say, "See, we still matter. We still have influence. We can still touch the edges of their world." If you don't react, They have to face the truth. They were never powerful, just noisy. But here's the difference between curiosity and a problem. Curious people stop when a boundary appears. Problems treat boundaries like an insult. Problems escalate. Problems recruit. Problems coordinate. Problems hide behind "we're just worried," while their behavior looks like a stalking hobby dressed up as a wellness check. And your watchers have been loud about it for too long. They assumed secrecy. They assumed nobody serious was paying attention. They assumed a screen makes them invisible. Screens don't hide patterns. Screens record them. So watch what fear does to their personality. It turns them cosmetic. They start performing innocence like it's a job. Suddenly they're posting about healing. Suddenly they're quoting privacy. Suddenly they're preaching, "Mind your business," like they didn't build a whole identity around minding yours. They become loud about peace because they can feel their peace cracking. This is reputation CPR. This is a public rebrand written by private dread. And it won't save them, because the bigger observer doesn't evaluate outfits. It evaluates behavior, movement, pattern, intent. Real observation is boring. It doesn't need drama. It doesn't need revenge. It needs classification. Once a person gets classified as fixated, unstable, and willing to coordinate harassment, they become expensive to keep near anything valuable. That's where consequences begin. Not in public humiliation, but in quiet filtration. Invitations dry up. Doors that used to open easily now require review. Connections go lukewarm. Background checks take longer. A manager starts documenting conversations. A colleague stops laughing and starts watching. People don't want chaos near their names. People don't want liability near their money. People don't want instability near their peace. And your watchers become a walking risk assessment. And the best part, the part that makes your watchers feel insane, is that they can't complain without confessing. Imagine them trying to explain, "I think someone is watching me." The immediate question becomes, why would anyone watch you? Then comes the question they can't survive. What were you doing that makes documentation feel like a threat? Innocent people don't fear receipts. Clean hands don't panic when the lights come on. Only people who know their behavior looks ugly from any serious angle start sweating when the room gets quiet. Meanwhile, your life starts to feel lighter in a way you didn't even know you needed. Fewer weird coincidences, fewer random messages that feel like probes, fewer mutuals delivering updates like they're reporting from a battlefield, less noise at the edge of your day. Not because your watchers became moral overnight, but because their resources start shrinking. Their little operation turns into a lonely hobby, and hobbies get abandoned when they stop making you feel powerful. The moment their obsession stops feeding their ego, it collapses under its own stupidity. And here's the dark humor that lands like a blade. Your watchers thought your life was the movie. They thought they were the directors, but they were always just extras, and the bigger observer is the editor. It cuts their scenes quietly, not with explosions, with silence. One by one, their little moments of influence get trimmed out. They keep showing up to set, but the camera doesn't roll. They keep talking, but the sound is muted. They keep performing, but nobody claps. That's what it looks like when the world stops giving them clean angles to reach you. Now let's be clear. You were never helpless. You were never powerless. You were simply outnumbered by boredom and insecurity for a while. People mistook your patience for weakness because they don't understand restraint. They don't have it, so they can't recognize it. But the bigger observer recognized it immediately. Restraint is rare. Restraint is expensive. Restraint is what you get when someone has the ability to destroy and still chooses not to. Because they understand, attention is ammunition and the wrong targets are a waste of bullets. And yes, the bigger observer watched you too. Not because you're a suspect, but because you're the contrast. You're the control group. You're the person under pressure who didn't turn into poison. You had reasons to retaliate. You had proof. You could have gone public, scorched everything, and collected applause like a paycheck. But you didn't. You chose the move that terrifies weak people. Distance, growth, irrelevance as a weapon. You starved the obsession by refusing to feed it. So your instructions stay simple and clean. Do not feed them. No explanations, no setting the record straight essays, no subtle responses meant to sting. Don't post for them. Don't hint for them. Don't watch their stories to see if they noticed you not watching them. That's the trap. They want to keep you orbiting their chaos. Your power is in exit velocity. Your power is in becoming a dead end with a locked gate and no sign explaining why. They will try a last-minute apology that isn't an apology. Watch for the "I hope there's no bad blood" text. Watch for the "we should catch up" invitation. Watch for the nostalgia bait. I miss the old days. That's not love. That's damage control. That's someone trying to manufacture a friendly screenshot they can show later if their behavior ever comes back around. They'll manufacture innocence the same way they tried to manufacture evidence against you. Same playbook, different costume. Let them. People who build costumes forget the body underneath still moves the same. The bigger observer watches movement, not outfits. Underneath their rebrand is still the same need: control, entitlement, and the urge to turn someone else's life into a hobby because their own life feels too empty to stare at. Concern doesn't coordinate. Concern doesn't recruit. Concern doesn't obsess at midnight like it's paid overtime. Now the obsession starts eating them from the inside. Every notification becomes suspicious. Every silence feels like exposure. Every delayed reply feels like judgment. They become the paranoid mess they tried to manufacture in you. And it works on them because they have something you didn't: guilt. They remember the lines they crossed. They remember the jokes they made when they thought nobody serious was listening. They remember the private messages they would never want read out loud. So their minds do what guilty minds do: rehearse, rewrite, and panic. And here's the quiet nightmare. The bigger observer doesn't need to drop the other shoe. It can let them live in uncertainty while it quietly adjusts variables. That's the harsh elegance of it. They'll experience a lifetime of almosts. Almost hired, almost promoted, almost invited, almost trusted, almost successful. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one too small to scream about. All of them together shaping a life that feels strangely cramped, like the walls moved in while they were busy watching you. At the same time, you start feeling a different kind of gravity. Not worship, not celebrity, just alignment, smoothness. Doors that open without begging, timing that works out. People who take you seriously without demanding you perform pain for credibility. You won't always know why. You don't need to. That's how real support looks. It doesn't require you to kneel for it. It shows up as quiet clearance, as space, as a path that stops feeling booby-trapped. Here's the twist they can't swallow. The bigger observer doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send warnings. It simply measures. It notices who keeps circling, who keeps tagging, who keeps asking questions that aren't theirs to ask. It notices the little campaigns, the coordinated concern, the timing of posts, the recycled narratives. Then it marks the pattern and quietly reroutes the environment around it. not by attacking them, by reducing their access. They call it bad luck. It's just the unspoken mathematics of consequence. And the moment they feel that shrink, they understand. They were never the hunters, just tracked. Because this was always about selection. You were being tested, yes, but so were they. And they failed loudly. They revealed they can't handle someone existing at a higher frequency without turning it into a project. They revealed they don't build, they monitor. They don't create, they consume. They don't improve, they compare. And comparison is the cheapest drug on the planet. It gives you a fake high with no effort, then leaves you shaking when the high runs out and the mirror turns back on. So here's the ending they don't get to control. You don't become a story they can narrate. You don't become a rumor they can manage. You become momentum. You become a person whose life is too full to stalk effectively. You become so disciplined that noise can't hook you. You become so selective that weak people can't even reach you to feel important. And when they finally understand that something big observed them first, that their obsession has been recorded in ways they can't edit, they will do the only thing they should have done at the start. Walk away and hope nobody remembers. Let them pretend. Their panic is not your responsibility. Their discomfort is not your burden. Your job is to keep your head down and your standards high. Keep moving. Keep building. Keep your boundaries quiet and absolute. Because the most violent thing you can do to someone who tried to own your attention is to live well without acknowledging their existence. So if you feel the air changing, don't mistake it for danger. That's space. That's pressure leaving the room. That's the part of your life that was being crowded by small people, finally opening up again. Let the silence return. Let the noise starve. Let the watchers learn the cruelest truth about you. You don't need to punish them. Reality will. And the moment they understand that something big observed them first, they'll finally grasp what you already knew in your bones. Your life was never their playground.